So as I mentioned, Esther is one of the latest stories in the Old Testament. It takes place about 490 BCE in a province in Persia. And she's one of the dispersed Jews who was sent away when the Babylonians came and took over the land. And many years later, King Cyrus actually invited the Jews to return to their homeland, but actually many Jews chose to remain and to stay. And Esther's family was one of them. So she's off in Persia with her cousin Mordecai. And the story ends this way if you haven't seen the Veggie Tales or where I actually got these pictures from. There's an actual movie on the book of Esther. Esther takes the chance and goes uninvited to see the king. And luckily, he likes her enough that he doesn't put her to death for such an action. And while she's there, she invites him to actually 2 banquets, he and Haman together. At the second banquet, she asks the king, "Why is it that you are trying to destroy me and my people?" And of course, King Ahasuerus, I like that face he's got, a kind of constant confusion, doesn't know what she's talking about. So she explains the law that Haman created and explains that Haman was behind all of this, that she and her people are going to be destroyed on the 13th day of the 12th month. The king is very angry when he hears this, and he has Haman arrested and taken away and hung on the gallows he'd originally created for Mordecai. So the Jewish people are saved. This moment is commemorated in the Jewish festival of Purim, which is celebrated before Passover in the spring. And it's very traditional. The Jews will go to the Jewish synagogue and they'll have people put on costumes and act out the story of Esther. And every time Haman comes on to the stage, everybody boos. And every time Esther or Mordecai comes on, everybody claps. And at the end, they eat, drink, and make merry. A Jewish scholar once wrote that all Jewish festivals can be summed up this way: they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. What's curious about this story is the book of Esther never mentions God. And both Jews and Christians have actually argued over the place of Esther in the Bible. So the question for us in the season of Advent, right before we're about to move into the New Testament, is, what is the point of this story? What do we learn from it? Why even tell it? Well, I will give 3 answers for you. The first answer is the reality of danger in our world. There are people in this world, for reasons I do not understand, who plot to harm other people. We've heard the story of the 300 girls taken out of school in Nigeria by extremists, and month after month nothing was done. We hear about the horrible reality of sex trafficking, of young children abducted or tricked into a life of prostitution. And we know that's not just happening out in the world, it's happening in our country. We don't hear very much about the children of Honduras living in the murder capital of the world, who try to flee to the United States for a life that might be less violent, and of course are treated like criminals and leeches and animals. We don't always hear about our companion synod, Central African Republic, which has been in day-to-day violence for so long it has shut down the entire country for over a year. Esther's people were faced with violence, genocide, and in order to save them, she had to risk her life to go uninvited to the king, which she does. In fact, if you look at the entire history of the Jewish people around the world, it's an amazing story over and over and over again of religious persecution. The Jews have never been the majority, and except for the brief and shining moment between King David in 1000 BCE and when the Assyrians came in 722, they've never had their own land. And even those who live in Israel now, the country that was created in 1948, it's a small portion of the Jewish population. But I find it fascinating then that the whole Jewish religion and race has held fast through thousands of years of persecution. Religious scholars will tell you that it is because they kept traditions like the weekly Sabbath meals, holidays, that they would dress different, they would eat different. They allowed themselves to be different, so they were reminded constantly who they were and what God they worshiped. The Jews kept their faith alive by living it daily at home and at work, when they went to bed and woke up. And they have a blessing and a prayer for almost every little action you can name throughout the day. It gave them meaning. It gave them identity, even when they were being threatened. The story of Esther wouldn't exist except for this threat to the Jewish people. And I don't think I have to say from the pulpit that any part Christians have ever had in persecuting or ignoring the plight of Jews over history is ignorant, foolish, regrettable, and sad. What's fascinating is that some historians argue that the worst thing that ever happened to Christianity was when it became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine. The minute the church got power and money and influence, we forgot what it meant at our core to be humble followers of Jesus. That throughout our history as Christians, we can see when we became the bully more often than not. We became violent. We became arrogant. We began to believe we deserved privilege and power, and we started to act more like Haman than Mordecai, throwing fits when people didn't bow down to us and our way of thinking and believing and doing things, even creating laws to destroy them. At this time of year, we always hear a little bit on the news about people who are upset that Christmas just doesn't quite seem to be as universal as it used to be. But honestly, as a pastor, I'm just not that worried. In fact, I think it's good for us as American Christians to have to keep our faith alive by living it instead of expecting the culture to carry it for us. Trying to keep America Christian isn't going to save Christianity. Sometimes it can actually make us act more like Haman. And some of the Christians I see on TV certainly look and act a lot more like Haman than they do Mordecai or Esther. Our faith is at its best when it is practiced at home, around a dinner table, when we gather together in worship, and when we celebrate our faith in our hearts. When we embody our faith in humility and compassion and service and love, we are a better testimony to our faith than if, say, City Hall has a nativity set in it or not. But I digress. The second answer to what this book means is a call to be brave. Mordecai warns Esther that just because she's a queen doesn't mean she'll be unaffected by this law to kill the Jews. And it's an important lesson for you and me. We're not unaffected by the events in this world, even if they seem far away. Being silent when we see someone abused or bullied or hurting is never an option. As people of faith, we are called to stand up for the vulnerable, to try to understand the side of those who feel persecuted, and to apologize for any way we've been a part of the problem. It's hard to watch the events going on right now around issues of race and law enforcement. And I don't like listening to voices that want to demonize anyone or explain away our problems or belittle. Instead, I want to listen to voices that show compassion for a system that's broken. Because of course it's broken. You and I as human beings live in a broken world, and our country hasn't magically figured out how to live sinlessly. Sexism and racism and all manner of forms of sin exist, and as the church we're called not to be defensive or dismissive, but rather to be brave. And being brave sometimes just means listening, even when it's hard. Being brave means speaking out in the name of compassion and hoping that both and all sides find resolution and peace. Be brave. Esther risked her life to save her people. Mordecai told Esther that maybe the reason she became queen was for this, to save her people. And so maybe you and I have been placed exactly where we are because God can do something amazing through us. Maybe we've been given the children we have, the family and the friends and the co-workers with us so that we can bless them, learn from them, work together with them. And maybe we live in this slice of history so that we can show compassion, forgiveness, and mercy in this time and place in the same way God has shown it to us. And now for the last piece. God isn't mentioned in the book of Esther, but God is present. God is actively working behind the scenes anonymously, creating coincidences and putting people in positions to do something important, and luckily they do. You and I do not always have the benefit of powerful dreams and angels at the bedside and burning bushes directing our lives. Neither did Esther. We can relate to this book. God worked through her whether she knew it or not. And so too in hindsight can we see that God was with us, working through the people in our lives, working through us. So Esther teaches us that the world is full of Hamans, their pride and power making this world dangerous for those that get in the way. But we are called to be wise and courageous in the face of this danger and to step up in wisdom and compassion. And we are taught that God will work through us. We can pray and pray for God to fix a problem, but sometimes we are the answer. God uses us. God works through us. God inspires us for a reason. Today I invite you to be the Esther or Mordecai in your life, to look around and be both loving and wise and brave. Amen.